I really feel like in the majority of TV shows and movies, therapists are either portrayed somewhat accurately and kind of okay, or just completely inaccurate, completely unethical, and cringy for me to watch as a therapist myself. But the third episode of Adolescence is done so well. It is one of the most accurate portrayals of a therapist that I have seen in a really long time. And I give them kudos because it's very hard to write in an accurate therapist while also not trying to over dramatize your TV show. Hi, my name's Erin. I'm a licensed therapist and I love analyzing all things pop culture. Today, I'm going to be breaking down the show Adolescence, and this is perfect for me and right up my alley because the majority of the work and the population that I work with is adolescents. Before I go too in depth, I want to mention I'll probably have some spoilers in here because I'm analyzing the character and that takes into account other things that have happened in the show. So if you haven't watched it yet and you want to go watch it, I think it's a phenomenal show and I think everyone should give it a shot. And if you don't want to watch it, at least just watch the third episode when the psychologist interviews him because it is so well done. So Adolescence follows Jamie Miller. He's a 13-year-old boy. He's accused of murdering a classmate. And throughout almost the entire show, he adheres to the narrative that he has not done it, that he has nothing to do with it. So the show basically unravels. Instead of it's a whodunit, it's a why has he done it. You kind of have pretty much confirmation that Jamie has done this, despite his adherence to his narrative. And so the entire show unfolds trying to understand Jamie's motivations. And we see and understand a lot of those motivations through episode 3. That's why I want to break down episode 3, when we get really good insight into Jamie's inner workings and his chaotic mind. We see grief, we see control, we see a lot of identity diffusion happening. And I'm going to give us a play-by-play of the therapist's role and her motivations, Jamie's defenses of himself, and ultimately what this says about real-life therapy and teen mental health. So pretty quickly, we see the psychologist come in the facility where Jamie is being held. And we learn pretty quickly that she's seen Jamie already a few times, and we start to learn that based on her conversation with a security officer, she's there to give a very objective report about Jamie. Now, I did a little research into this because I also wanted to understand her motivations, because we should already frame her being there is going to be a little bit different than a traditional therapy session. She was there to write a pre-sentence offense report. And this show's based in the UK, so I looked up the UK version. In the US, we also do this. It's basically a report that is given to a judge in order for him to have a correct assessment of what an accurate sentence might be for a situation. In the US, a probation officer typically writes it, but in the UK, a social worker or probation officer will write them. And in writing the report, they gather a ton of data points. They gather school information and family interviews, and in this case, a psychologist's point of view. And we learn that there's already been one other psychologist there, and Jamie uses this as a tactic of power and control over her, which I will get into more as we move forward. But just so that you have the context, her role in this is to get the most objective and in-depth understanding of Jamie and his inner workings. So her role looks different in the sense that she's not going to entirely try to build a long-lasting relationship with Jamie, which is done usually really slowly. And I do think she is purposely pushing his buttons in a lot of ways that a lot of therapists would look at that and be like, that's cold or that's harsh. But you have to understand the context of why she's doing it so that she can see the full inner workings of how Jamie moves through the world. And that means actually making him angry and making him pissed off at points in time. I really enjoy this opening scene. So she intentionally goes and she gets him hot chocolate and she puts marshmallows on it from home. She intentionally remembers that Jamie likes marshmallows on his hot chocolate, and she brings them to make him feel seen and heard in that way. This is called rapport building. So she's doing this in order to gain trust from Jamie, and so that he'll be more soft towards her, more open towards her. So Bryony actually brings Jamie a sandwich from home as well, and she puts a pickle on it, and he doesn't like pickles. She doesn't know this, so they kind of have a little quip about it. But what's actually interesting about this is she admits to messing up. She goes, "Oh, I really messed up then," which is so subtle. You would just overlook that as a watcher. But as a therapist, I pick up on that, and I think that is great rapport building, because teenagers often feel like their parents or the adults in their life will not take ownership or apologize for making a mistake. And so if you as an individual are willing to do that and show them that, that is immediately connecting for them. I really like here where Jamie is talking about going on vacation with his family, and Bryony asks a clarifying question. He goes, "No, we went banana picking." It was super sarcastic, super sassy, and that is so teenager. It's such a great portrayal of teenage adolescent brain. They think that you should just understand them and just get them. But when they're sarcastic, I think it's actually like a great portrayal of how they function and move through the world. So right after this sarcastic comment, things shift very quickly. And the psychologist, she starts to test the waters a little bit. She wants to ask about masculinity. She wants to ask about his family, being a man, all these things. Jamie does not like that and very quickly tries to shut it down. Jamie, throughout the entire session, is trying to take control and power over the psychologist. I'll point it out in every scene that I see it, but it's pretty stark that he is insecure, he is young and feels like he wants to be liked, and that causes him to seek out power over other people. So in this scene in particular, she's questioning him about masculinity. He starts accusing her of not asking appropriate questions, and it escalates to a point where he says, "I want to see your notes." She says, "No, you can't see my notes." And he goes, "But the lawyer said that you work for us. As in, I own you, I'm over you, so I have access and power to your notes." And she sets a hard boundary. She says no. And this is true. This is true in the therapy world, that if a client asks to see their notes, usually you don't let them. I mean, you can, but you're not really supposed to. And so it is one of those things that when you take notes, you're very careful about what notes you take, because they can be seen by a client, especially if they are subpoenaed by a court. Then you're required to turn over your notes on any clients. But you do want to be careful in what you write about clients, because at some point in time they could have access and could read it. But in this case, it is very appropriate for her to set that boundary and be like, "No, you're not seeing my notes." And it was just a power play on his end. A lot of counseling is analyzing and assessing the power dynamics in the room. And you have to be constantly aware of those dynamics and the influence that you have over another person's life as you continue to build a relationship with them. It is a very important job and a very tough job. So shortly after this interaction, there's another power play dynamic in which she is asking questions, and Jamie had gotten into a fight earlier in that week. So she's asking him about that, and he goes, "It's not that interesting." And she goes, "Okay, it's not that interesting. Let's move on." And he goes, "Oh, so I'm in charge now?" And she says, "Maybe." And this is a great way of neutralizing him, where she's not going to say, "Yeah, of course you're in charge," because he realizes throughout the session that he's not actually in charge. And if she says no, well, then that kills the relationship on the spot. So her saying maybe is a great neutralizing statement. She continues to talk about their conversation, and she says, "It's easier for me to see where the conversation goes and steers it than to outright ask you the questions that I want to ask you," which is so true of therapy, right? A therapist is in charge of the session, right? They guide and direct where the session should go based on a client's goals and what the client says. But ultimately, the client is in charge of what gets brought out in the session, what they want to talk about, what they want to process, and of their experiences. And so this is true. This is also such an accurate portrayal of what we do in therapy, which is steer a conversation without absolutely domineering it. So as she's talking about how she guides conversation and her intent in being there, she asks Jamie, "Can we talk about your dad? Would that be okay?" He immediately deflects and says, "Can I see your notes?" Again, not only was this a deflection, which is really common in therapy, where you ask a question and the client either doesn't fully answer the question or just in a roundabout way seems like they answer it, but really they just change the subject. That happens all the time. But what it also is doing is he's not only deflecting, he's going back to trying to grasp power again in the situation. And she says something perfect. She goes, nope, you're not that in charge. As in, you do have power in this room. You do have control. But ultimately, I am the one here that's going to be in power. And that is really hard to do. She walks this very fine line between being a dominating and controlling force, which she does not respond well to, but also still trying to maintain proper control of the session. We move forward a little bit in the conversation, and Brittany is asking Jamie about his experience playing sports, and he goes into his football or soccer experience here in America on the weekends. And when he would mess up, his dad would look away. His dad wouldn't say anything negative in particular, but he would withdraw his reaction, which was really shaming towards Jamie. He names that. And as Brittany brings us into the room, he becomes irate because he goes, you're supposed to say that a parent could never be ashamed of their kid. And Brittany does not take the bait. She does not say, well, Jamie, you shouldn't be ashamed. Or, yeah, I'm sure your parents aren't ashamed of you. She just lets him sit and stew in those feelings because that's the truth. That is the truth, that his dad and his mom are probably ashamed of him. And on some level, he knows that. And he's looking for somebody to tell him otherwise of his feelings that aren't true. And this is really hard for therapists. We often want to save our own clients from their feelings. And that is not our goal. Our goal is not to save them from their feelings. Our goal is to help them understand why those feelings are there and how to process them in a way that helps them move towards betterment or towards their goals so that those feelings, those negative thoughts are no longer there. But it's really easy as a therapist to swoop in and be like, there's no way your dad felt that way about you, right? Like, you don't know what he was thinking. Maybe you were mind reading. It's just brilliantly done. And it's especially hard to do when you're dealing with like a young 13-year-old. The conversation continues and things start to escalate about halfway through the episode. He asks her, can you get me out of here? What am I doing here? And she plainly states back, like, all the other facilities were full. And then he interrupts her and they just start interrupting each other, going back and forth, escalating. And as a therapist, if it was a normal session and a kid asked me that, I would be like, I'm sorry, I can't do that for you. And I would just let them sit in that anger or stew. And if they wanted to erupt, I just would be sitting there, not saying anything, just letting the silence speak for itself, letting them wear themselves out, and just being present to all of the feelings that are erupting. However, she does not do this. She intentionally, in my opinion, escalates the situation because she wants to see what happens when Jamie is angry or you get a rise out of him. So instead of saying, I'm sorry, Jamie, I can't help you, she just keeps speaking over him and over him and over him to get more and more angry. And he immediately stands up out of his chair in order to regain power and control over Brittany. So as Jamie is standing over her and he's angry and escalated, he goes, you do not control what I do in my life. Again, all the power and control, that is his focus. But the significance of this is the complete denial that he lives in, that she does, in fact, control a lot of his life. In fact, what she writes controls a large part of his fate, and he is just in complete denial about that. He is absolutely panicking, trying to grasp any control back that he can. So after this, they take a break because Jamie's losing his absolute mind, and she does such a good job of remaining stoic and calm and not getting dysregulated by him or showing him that she's dysregulated by him, because if she shows that, game's over. He's won. He has power over her because he has gotten her to fear him, a 13-year-old. So brilliantly done on her end to just be so regulated. That is something that not a lot of people think about in therapy, is that when somebody is telling you something incredibly traumatic or something that dysregulates you, maybe it hits on your own story, or maybe you're just disgusted by what a client is telling you, you remain neutral, calm, and present. And a lot of people don't understand that is a huge, huge skill that you have to learn in therapy. And Bryony is doing it beautifully as a 13-year-old is shouting at her and is up in her face. I'm so impressed. Bryony leaves the room to take a break and she goes back to watch videos. And I thought a lot about this because she's really intentionally watching Jamie in the room, and you can't figure out why she's watching him or what she even sees. She sees something that she needs to because she's like, I've got all I need. I think she was watching to see potentially what a male would do to Jamie in the room. As in, how does Jamie respond when a male force is around him versus a female force? Before this, Bryony was demanding that Jamie sit back down, and he was not listening to her. In fact, he just got more escalated and got in her face. But I think, even though we don't see the video, she sees Jamie re-regulate and sit back down as soon as a male force in the room tells him to sit back down. And she is so aware of the dynamics at play, including her gender being a huge contributing factor to Jamie's reaction. That is something you totally have to consider in therapy. Bryony comes back in the room, moves her chair to the side, which you would think, why is she moving it closer to him? That doesn't really make a lot of sense when he's just reacted like that. But she does this to literally get physically in his space, to physically domineer over him and steadily be like, no, actually, I am in charge of this and I'm not scared of you. That movement towards him subconsciously says, actually, even in the midst of your anger, your disruption, I'm not going anywhere and I'm actually going to draw closer to you because I actually am not scared of you. It's a very psychological warfare type of move. At one point, Jamie throws his hot chocolate because he's really upset. So when Bryony left, she was going to bring him more. And he says, no, I don't deserve it. Just go ahead, ask your questions. I'm all better now. So we watch this flip where he recognizes what he did was wrong. There is some moral understanding of right and wrong. And you end up having a little bit of empathy for this kid. You're like, oh man, he's really angry. He's just a teenager. He's trying to figure it out. And he puts on this very sweet, I don't think it's a facade because I think he's still developing his identity. I don't think you can have a facade if you don't truly have an identity, which is what I wanted to talk about, was his identity diffusion throughout the entire episode. We see Jamie make these huge pendulum swings from being incredibly irate to apologetic and kind to laughing and being a friendly individual to back to being manipulative and harsh. He's trying to figure out who he is in the midst of all of this. So we get lots of different faces of Jamie because his identity is diffusing because he doesn't have one yet. And this is very common in the teen world. You are in the midst of a core part of identity development. And identity development is a lifelong process, but the core part of it really happens between, I would say, like 10 years old to maybe like 25-ish. That's like really a big range for it. And so much of counseling a teen is helping them be guided towards who they want to be and who they want to grow into. And unfortunately, in the case of Jamie, it's pretty unclear who he believes himself to be or wants to be. There's such a cognitive dissonance between that. As we move forward, she starts asking him about his relationships with females, women at school, friends, that sort of thing. And at one point in time, they're talking anatomy, and he uses a very slang term for some of the anatomy that they're talking about. And she goes, oh, that's okay. You don't have to use my language. Also, a point on thing in therapy of talking to teens is leveling with them using their language. And there's a very delicate balance to this because you don't want to be an individual that is seen as cringy and old by a teenager because you're using their language. But you also don't want to be stiff and out of touch from them by using clinical language. So you have to be able to navigate that type of language barrier in order to connect more deeply with the teenager that you're talking to. Super accurate. I thought this was funny. At one point in time, she does say, well, how does that make you feel?
How does that make you feel?
And I just wanted to say, yes, we do ask that question. I know it's cliche, and it's a cliche for a reason, and it's because we have to ask that. So we go full circle again as the conversation continues. Jamie feels like he's ugly, and he's asking Brittany to basically step in and say, you're not ugly, Jamie. And she calls him out on this. She says, you think that I'm supposed to contradict you when you said your dad was ashamed of you, or now that you're ugly. But what I think actually doesn't matter. And this makes him escalate quite quickly to the point where he again gets out of his chair, throws his chair, starts screaming that everything is a trap. And the male officer outside the door comes over and yells at Jamie. He looks over at the officer, acknowledges him, is about to maybe make movement towards sitting down, and Brittany waves the officer away. Jamie does not miss a beat. He does not. He is so astute. He is very observational, and he starts slow walking over her to intimidate her. He's still standing over her. She's sitting, and he goes, look at you, signaling him away like a queen. He's trying to get under her skin. He's trying to belittle her and, again, show that she's not that important. Who do you think you are in this space? The reason she sent away the officer, I think, is going full circle back to what I said earlier of trying to see how Jamie responds to women versus men. When that security officer was in there earlier, he was able to re-regulate Jamie and get him to sit down. But in order to maintain control and power in the session, she knows that she has to be the one to get Jamie to re-sit down. So she keeps asking him. She's still stoic and calm, and finally eventually gets Jamie to sit down, which is a great move on her part. Brittany pushes the conversation forward and brings out Instagram and starts to analyze and ask him about his Instagram usage. And instead of asking him what he posts or why he posts things, which she does ask him, what she really cares about is the heart of why he has Instagram. And a lot of people would overlook this because they're like, well, he's a teenager. Every teenager has Instagram and it's just what they do. That's just the general belief. But in her understanding more fully, what was your intent in downloading Instagram and using it, she gets into more of his internal motivations and his internal thinking. It's not something that I feel like a lot of people would care to fully understand, and so I think it's really important that she is picking at this a bit. Brittany knows what she's doing in every question she asks, every movement she makes. It's so intentional. So she brings out all of the comments on his Instagram that are pretty bullying and pretty harsh. He's super blindsided by this. He does not like that she does this. And so as she's asking about it, she slips up and she says, on your Facebook comments, not Instagram. Jamie, as I said earlier, does not miss a beat. He pounces on this. He goes, I scared you, didn't I, earlier when I was shouting at you? He sees this slip up as an opportunity to regain power and momentum after being blindsided that she brought out the Instagram comments. And at first I thought she genuinely did slip up, but I watched the episode twice just to get a good feel. And I was like, no, she purposely said Facebook to see what he would do when he's feeling vulnerable and he sees somebody else's vulnerability come out. He uses it to his advantage. It's very sick and very sad that she's recognizing this. So Brittany actually, I think, shows some empathy in the midst of all of this. As she's asking him about the Instagram comments, you start to see that they're actually really harsh and pretty unrelenting. And she goes, Jamie, these are really cruel. And you kind of see this moment where she probably recognizes like a lot of his bullying was unwarranted, and it makes sense that he's feeling so angry. But then, in classic Jamie fashion, he flips on a dime and starts being incredibly vindictive. He says, look at you, all hopeful I'm going to say something important. Like, it's so cold. It's so mean. I think this is where, in the episode, she realizes Jamie is not well. It's this recognition that Jamie is on his way, or could have been on his way, to being incredibly psychopathic on some level. As they're talking about the girl that died, Jamie admits that he had a knife and that he scared her, but he wasn't going to touch her. He wouldn't do that like all the other men would. And they're talking, and it also has come to light that Jamie asked her out when she was at her weakest point. And Brittany says very simply, so your theory was that her weakness made her more gettable. And it's this like very simple but very powerful statement that Jamie views women especially as objects. Brittany then says, Jamie, whatever claims you make about her, she's gone. And she's poking at her death being final. And she really wants to understand, does Jamie have an understanding of the finality of death? Does he have a recognition of this? Because if he does, and he cares about it, it shows that he has a recognition of the sanctity of life. He does not really get there. Again, showing that he's not necessarily remorseful for his actions. He's definitely unaccepting of his actions. Even as he tells her that he had a knife around the girl that died, he still maintains that he didn't do anything. He did not hurt her, which is crazy because we all know that's not true at this point. So he's in complete denial. He's still grasping for control, and he is starting to show that his way of thinking is well on its way to being psychopathic. Brittany ends the session really quickly after this. She has all she needs, especially after what he said about her and not choosing not to touch her, and how that somehow makes him morally better than other men who would have, etc. She's pretty in the clear about the way that Jamie thinks about women and moves through the world. So she tells Jamie this, and Jamie starts losing his mind. He's like, no, we can't be done. This isn't over. This isn't a proper goodbye. And he's screaming, and he just goes, wait, I have a question. Do you like me? And it's so innocent. It is so teenage coded. Oh God, sorry I said that. It's so teenage-esque. Sorry, I work with teens. It's very teenage-esque in the sense that all teenagers are so stuck on, am I liked and who likes me? It's a normal part of life, and I know a lot of people actually don't even grow out of that, but it's very normal for teenagers for that to be their internal motivation, to be liked and to make sure that others are respectful of them and their personality or their identity. And it seems it's so innocent, but it just strikes at the core of he's still only 13 years old. Brittany navigates this really well. You see her pause for a minute, assessing what she should say. And ultimately she knows what she should say, which is, I am an objective reporter, and what I think about you doesn't matter, Jamie. And that's so hard for him to hear, but it's the ethical and correct thing for her to say, because her report cannot be biased on whether she does or does not like Jamie as a person. She is there simply to understand his understanding of everything going on. Jamie loses his mind at this and absolutely erupts in the hallway, banging on the windows, and ends with, tell my dad that I'm okay. Ultimately, this portrayal was so great on both ends, of both the teenager and the therapist herself. I think the questions that Jamie was pushing back against, or the way that he answered questions, was very teenage-esque in the way that he's like, I don't know, or whatever, it doesn't matter. Like, those are very teenage answers. And her therapy questions were very pointed and very they were trackable in the sense that you understood why she would ask such a thing. I just the writers of this show are just so good. I just give them so much props. I know it wasn't a perfect portrayal of a therapist. There's things that I could have pointed out that I'm like, oh, I would have done this differently. But again, her role was a bit different than just like a regular therapy session. She's trying to write objective reporting, which means that she needs to get a rise out of Jamie and not build as much rapport as you would with a normal client. And it was just such a delicate balance to strike, and I think they did it so well. If you liked this content, you would probably love my other videos. I am so appreciative for any support on my channel, whether it's a like, a comment, a sub. I am so grateful, and I can't wait to keep growing my channel. So thanks so much for coming along, and I will see you all soon.